The Princess and the Pea Re-imagined. Chapter 1. The Royal Dilemma. High atop a verdant hill, where morning mist danced through ancient oak trees, stood the castle of Valdoria. Its golden towers caught the first rays of dawn like beacons of hope, and its gardens bloomed with flowers that seemed to sing with the wind. Within these walls lived King Edmund and Queen Rosalind, rulers beloved by their people for their wisdom and fairness. But on this particular morning, as autumn painted the leaves in shades of amber and crimson, a shadow of concern clouded their usually bright faces. Their son, Prince Adrian, had reached his 23rd year. Tall and kind-hearted, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a smile that could charm the stars from the sky, he was everything a kingdom could want in a future king. Yet he remained unwed, and the time had come for him to choose a bride who would one day rule beside him. "Another invitation has arrived," Queen Rosalind announced, holding up an elegant scroll sealed with lavender wax. "Princess Cordelia of Silvermere wishes to visit our court." She set the invitation beside a growing pile of similar requests from noble families across the realm. King Edmund stroked his silver beard thoughtfully. "She comes with impressive credentials, educated in 7 languages, skilled in music and art, and beautiful by all accounts." "Yes," the Queen agreed, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Yet beauty and accomplishments are not enough, my dear husband. Remember what we learned from your father's reign and your grandfather's before him." The king nodded gravely. They had inherited a kingdom once plagued by rulers who possessed every royal grace, except the one that mattered most: the ability to face problems with courage and ingenuity. Previous generations had suffered through droughts unaddressed, trade disputes ignored, and challenges met with elegant hand-wringing rather than decisive action. "Adrian will face trials we cannot imagine," King Edmund said, gazing out the window toward his thriving kingdom. "Famines, wars, political intrigue, all manner of difficulties that require more than courtly manners to solve. He needs a partner who will not merely endure hardship with grace, but who will roll up her sleeves and work to make things better." Queen Rosalind joined him at the window, watching their people go about their morning routines in the village below. "A true queen must be someone who sees a problem and asks not, 'How long must I bear this?' but rather, 'How can I fix this?'" The royal couple had spent months discussing this very challenge. They needed a test, something that would reveal not just a princess's patience or breeding, but her character when faced with a solvable difficulty. Traditional courtship rituals of dancing, dining, and polite conversation told them nothing about how a potential bride would handle the real challenges of leadership. "Have you given more thought to our plan?" the Queen asked quietly. The king's eyes twinkled with the hint of a smile. "Indeed I have, and I believe we've devised something quite clever." He turned from the window, his expression mixing hope with determination. "If we're to find our son a bride worthy of this kingdom, we must look beyond what she says she can do, and discover what she will actually do when tested." In the distance, Prince Adrian could be seen in the courtyard below, practicing sword work with the captain of the guard. Even from their tower window, his parents could see the weight on his shoulders, the knowledge that his choice of bride would affect not just his happiness, but the future of everyone in their realm. The Queen's mind drifted to the stories her own grandmother had told her about the kingdom's darker days. Queens who had fainted at the first sign of crisis, leaving their husbands to face plagues and invasions alone. Rulers who had dismissed their subjects' concerns with airy waves of jeweled hands, believing that problems would simply resolve themselves through divine providence or the efforts of others. Those reigns had nearly brought Valdoria to ruin. "Do you remember the tale of Queen Celeste?" King Edmund asked, as if reading his wife's thoughts. "When the great flood threatened the eastern villages, she spent 3 days composing a poem about the tragedy instead of organizing rescue efforts." Hundreds might have perished if the Merchants' Guild hadn't taken matters into their own hands. Or Queen Lydia, who received reports of crop blight and responded by commissioning a tapestry depicting more bountiful times, Rosalind added with a rueful shake of her head, as she believed that focusing on beauty and grace would somehow manifest prosperity. Meanwhile, families starved while waiting for her to act. These cautionary tales had shaped their own reign and now influenced their hopes for their son's future. They had worked tirelessly to restore their people's faith in royal leadership, proving that true nobility meant serving rather than simply being served. King Edmund placed a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. Adrian has learned these lessons well, but he cannot carry the burden alone. He needs someone who will stand beside him not as an ornament, but as a true partner in the work of ruling. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the castle's ancient stones. Somewhere in the kingdom, perhaps in a distant palace or traveling along a winding road, was the woman who would help shape Valdoria's future. The question that haunted the royal parents was simple, yet profound. Would they recognize her when she arrived? "Then let us begin," Queen Rosalind said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "Let us find a princess who will not just wear the crown, but earn it." Chapter 2. The Test Revealed. 3 days later, in the privacy of the royal chambers, King Edmund and Queen Rosalind finalized their ingenious plan. Spread across the mahogany table before them lay detailed drawings of the castle's East Wing guest quarters, along with sketches that would have puzzled any observer unfamiliar with their scheme. "The Rose Chamber will serve our purpose perfectly," the Queen said, pointing to the elegant suite reserved for visiting dignitaries. "It's beautiful enough to honor any princess, yet private enough for our test to remain undetected." The king studied the architectural drawings with the intensity of a military strategist. "And you're certain the staff can be trusted with this secret?" "Margaret has served our family for 30 years, Queen Rosalind replied, referring to the head housekeeper. "She understands what's at stake. She'll prepare the bed herself, and only she will know the truth." Their plan was both simple and brilliant in its execution. The Rose Chamber's magnificent four-poster bed, carved from ancient oak and draped with silk curtains the color of sunset, would appear every inch the luxurious accommodation befitting royalty. Fine linen sheets would be layered over the softest mattresses gold could buy, and goose-down pillows would be fluffed to perfection. To any observer, it would seem like a bed fit for the gods themselves. But beneath those sumptuous mattresses, carefully placed and strategically positioned, would lie a collection of smooth river pebbles. Not sharp stones that might cause injury, but rounded rocks just large enough to create unmistakable discomfort for anyone attempting to sleep. The pebbles would be positioned in such a way that a person lying down would immediately sense that something was amiss, a problem that could be investigated and solved by anyone with sufficient curiosity and determination. "The beauty of this test," King Edmund explained, warming to his subject, "is that it reveals character rather than simply testing endurance. We're not seeking a princess who can suffer through a sleepless night with stoic grace. Any well-bred lady can do that." "Exactly," his wife agreed, her eyes bright with anticipation. "We need someone who will think, this is wrong, and I can make it right. Someone who won't simply accept discomfort as an inevitable part of life." They had considered other tests, intellectual puzzles, staged emergencies, diplomatic challenges, but all of those could be prepared for or anticipated. This test would catch their subjects completely off guard, revealing their true nature when faced with an unexpected obstacle. The Queen traced her finger along the drawing of the bed frame. "A true leader doesn't wait for others to solve problems that she could address herself. When the people face hardship, we cannot simply offer them sympathy and expect others to provide solutions. The pebbles represent every challenge our kingdom might face." The king added thoughtfully, "Drought, disease, trade disputes. threats from neighboring realms, problems that require someone willing to roll up their sleeves and work toward resolution, rather than merely managing the consequences of inaction. Margaret knocked softly on the chamber door, entering when beckoned. The silver-haired housekeeper had overseen countless royal visits and understood discretion better than most diplomats. "Your Majesties," she said with a respectful curtsy, "I've prepared the chamber exactly as you specified. The bed appears absolutely perfect to any casual observer, but—" She paused, allowing herself a small smile. "Well, I certainly wouldn't want to spend a night in it without investigating the cause of the problem." King Edmund nodded approvingly. "And you're prepared to maintain this secret, even if visiting royalty or their servants express displeasure with the accommodations?" "Of course, Your Majesty, though I confess I'm quite curious to see which princess will prove worthy of our young prince." Queen Rosalind stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the kingdom that would someday need a queen capable of more than ceremonial duties. "As are we all, Margaret, as are we all." Over the following hours, the royal couple refined every detail of their plan with the precision of master craftsmen. They determined that exactly 7 pebbles would provide the optimal level of discomfort enough to be immediately noticeable, but not so many as to make investigation overly difficult. The stones would be placed in a specific pattern: 3 near where a person's shoulders would rest, 2 at the middle of the back, and 2 more where the hips would settle. "We must be absolutely certain that any reasonable person would detect the problem within minutes of lying down," King Edmund insisted, as he and Margaret tested the arrangement themselves. "But we also need to ensure that the solution is achievable for someone willing to investigate." Margaret nodded, adjusting 1 pebble slightly. "A princess who simply endures the discomfort all night demonstrates patience, Your Majesty, but patience alone won't help her subjects when action is required." The Queen had given considerable thought to the morning-after interview as well. "We'll ask each princess the same question in the same casual manner. 'How did you sleep, dear?' Their response will tell us everything we need to know about their character." They anticipated several possible reactions. Some princesses might complain bitterly about the poor quality of their accommodations, demanding that servants be disciplined for the oversight. Others might suffer in polite silence, mentioning their discomfort only when directly questioned. A few might even lie, claiming to have slept well rather than risk appearing ungrateful or difficult. "But the princess we seek," King Edmund said with growing excitement, "will tell us exactly what she discovered and how she solved the problem. She'll speak not with complaint or false politeness, but with the satisfaction of someone who faced a challenge and overcame it." The king and queen also considered the various excuses they might hear. Previous royal guests had blamed everything from unfamiliar surroundings to phases of the moon for their poor sleep. They expected to hear creative explanations. Perhaps the princess would claim the altitude affected her rest, or that she was naturally sensitive to changes in weather. Some might even suggest that the bed was haunted or cursed. "The truly remarkable part," Queen Rosalind observed, "is that none of the failed candidates will likely consider the most obvious possibility, that something physical is wrong with the bed that could be discovered and corrected. They had even planned for the possibility that a princess might summon servants during the night to address her discomfort. In that case, Margaret had been instructed to respond that the household staff was not available until morning, forcing the guest to either solve the problem herself or endure the consequences of inaction. "This test will reveal not just intelligence, but initiative," the king concluded. "Any scholar can identify a problem when given time to study it, but a true leader recognizes issues immediately and takes personal responsibility for finding solutions, even when it would be easier to delegate or simply complain." As evening approached, a messenger arrived with news that Princess Cordelia's entourage had been spotted on the horizon. The first test was about to begin. The test was set. Now they could only wait to see which princess would rise to meet this unexpected challenge, and which would reveal themselves as fundamentally unequal to the demands of true leadership. Somewhere in the distance, carriages were already traveling toward Valdoria, carrying young women who had no idea that their character was about to be tested in the most unusual way imaginable. Chapter 3. The Parade of Failures. Part 1. Princess Cordelia of Silvermere arrived at Castle Valdoria in a procession that could have rivaled a royal coronation. Her carriage, painted in pristine white with gold leaf trim, was pulled by 6 matching gray horses whose manes had been braided with silver ribbons. Footmen in powder blue livery preceded her arrival, announcing her approach with trumpets that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Even her travel clothes, a gown of deep emerald silk with intricate embroidery, spoke of wealth and refinement that few kingdoms could match. King Edmund and Queen Rosalind welcomed their guest in the Great Hall, where Princess Cordelia performed a curtsy so perfectly executed it seemed choreographed by master dancers. She was undeniably beautiful, with golden hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure and eyes the color of summer sapphires. When she spoke, her voice carried the musical quality of someone trained in elocution from birth. "Your Majesties honor me with your invitation," she said, her words precisely articulated. "The beauty of your kingdom quite surpasses its reputation, which I had thought impossible." Prince Adrian, standing beside his parents, offered a polite bow and the appropriate courtly responses. Princess Cordelia was everything a royal bride should be, according to tradition, elegant, well-educated, and diplomatically trained. Yet as the evening progressed, something about the interaction felt hollow to him, like admiring a perfect painting rather than connecting with a living person. During the elaborate dinner served in the castle's finest dining hall, Princess Cordelia demonstrated her accomplishments with practiced ease. She conversed fluently in 3 languages during the first course alone, referenced classical literature while discussing the wine selection, and even performed a brief musical piece on the golden harp that graced the hall's corner. Her knowledge was impressive, her manners impeccable, and her beauty indisputable. "Tell me, Princess Cordelia," Queen Rosalind inquired during the 3rd course, "what do you see as the greatest challenges facing our generation of rulers?" The princess dabbed at her lips with a silk napkin before responding. "I believe, Your Majesty, that maintaining proper diplomatic relations requires constant attention to protocol and ceremony. A ruler must never appear wanting in grace or sophistication, as this reflects poorly on the entire kingdom." King Edmund exchanged a subtle glance with his wife. "And what of more practical concerns? Economic difficulties, natural disasters, conflicts that require decisive action?" Princess Cordelia's smile remained perfect, but her response revealed the limitations they had begun to suspect. "Surely such matters are best handled by advisors and ministers, Your Majesty. A royal's duty is to provide moral leadership and maintain the dignity of the crown. Direct involvement in mundane problems would diminish the mystique that makes royalty effective." The conversation continued in this vein throughout the evening, with Princess Cordelia consistently deflecting discussions of hands-on leadership in favor of ceremonial duties and symbolic gestures. She spoke eloquently about the importance of appearing above common concerns, of maintaining distance between royalty and the practical problems of governance. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret appeared to escort Princess Cordelia to her chambers. "I do hope the Rose Chamber meets with your approval, Your Highness," the housekeeper said with perfect courtesy. "Please, don't hesitate to inform me if you require anything during the night." Princess Cordelia graciously accepted the offer, following Margaret through the torchlit corridors to the beautifully appointed guest suite. The Rose Chamber looked magnificent, in the candlelight tapestries depicting garden scenes adorned the walls. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases, and the 4-poster bed appeared as inviting as any accommodation in the finest palaces of Europe. "How perfectly lovely," Princess Cordelia murmured, genuinely pleased with the elegant surroundings. She dismissed her lady-in-waiting for the evening, preferring to prepare for sleep in private. What followed was exactly what the royal parents had anticipated, yet hoped they would not witness. Princess Cordelia settled into the beautifully prepared bed, expecting the comfort that her station demanded. Instead, within moments of lying down, she encountered the strategically placed pebbles. She shifted position repeatedly, trying to find a comfortable spot, growing increasingly frustrated as sleep eluded her. Throughout the long night, she tossed and turned, muttering complaints about the inadequacy of provincial accommodations. Not once did it occur to her to investigate the source of her discomfort. Not once did she consider that she might take action to improve her situation. Instead, she spent the hours composing mental criticisms of the household staff and planning the stern words she would deliver in the morning about proper bed preparation. When dawn finally arrived, Princess Cordelia emerged from the rose chamber looking haggard and irritable. Her perfect coiffure had been destroyed by a night of restless movement, and her usually flawless complexion showed the stray of sleeplessness. The royal family gathered for breakfast in the morning room, where sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the gardens. Princess Cordelia joined them, making a visible effort to restore her composed demeanor despite her obvious exhaustion. "How did you sleep, dear?" Queen Rosalind inquired with gentle concern, the question carrying far more weight than its casual delivery suggested. Princess Cordelia's response sealed her fate as surely as if she had failed a written examination. "Dreadfully, Your Majesty. I must speak plainly. The bed in your guest chamber is absolutely unsuitable for someone of royal birth. I couldn't manage even a moment's rest. Clearly, your household staff requires better training in proper bed preparation. I do hope you'll address this matter immediately, as future guests should not be subjected to such inadequate accommodations." The princess continued her critique for several more minutes, detailing her discomfort and suggesting various punishments for the servants she held responsible. Not once did she mention attempting to discover the cause of the problem. Not once did she consider that she might have investigated or addressed the issue herself. King Edmund and Queen Rosalind maintained their diplomatic smiles throughout the tirade, but their hearts sank with the certainty that Princess Cordelia, despite all her accomplishments and beauty, was not the partner their son needed. She was everything they had learned to distrust in a leader, someone who would identify problems only to assign blame and demand that others solve them. Chapter 4. The Parade of Failures. Part 2. 2 weeks after Princess Cordelia's disappointing departure, Princess Beatrice of Golden Haven arrived with an entourage that spoke of immense wealth rather than mere nobility. Her carriages were crafted from exotic woods and adorned with gemstones that caught the light like captured starfire. The horses pulling her conveyance wore harnesses studded with actual diamonds, and her personal guard carried weapons forged from the finest steel money could procure. Princess Beatrice herself embodied the confidence that came from never having wanted for anything. Tall and statuesque, with auburn hair that cascaded in perfect waves, and a wardrobe that could have funded a small army, she moved through the world with the assurance of someone accustomed to having every desire fulfilled instantly. Her reputation preceded her charitable donations to worthy causes, patronage of the arts, and a mind for commerce that had expanded her family's already considerable fortune. "Your Majesties," she declared upon her presentation, "I come bearing gifts that I hope will demonstrate the prosperity our kingdoms could enjoy through alliance." Indeed, her servants spent an hour unloading treasures, rare spices from distant lands, bolts of silk that shimmered like liquid moonlight, and jeweled ornaments that would have made dragon hoards seem modest by comparison. During the welcoming feast, Princess Beatrice regaled the court with tales of her business ventures and philanthropic endeavors. She had established orphanages in 3 cities, funded the construction of libraries, and personally overseen trade negotiations that brought unprecedented wealth to her father's realm. Her accomplishments were genuinely impressive, suggesting a mind capable of grasping complex problems and marshaling resources to address them. "Tell me about your approach to governance," King Edmund inquired, genuinely curious whether this princess might possess the practical wisdom they sought. "I believe in the power of delegation and proper resource allocation," Princess Beatrice replied confidently. "When problems arise, I identify the most qualified experts, provide them with adequate funding, and hold them accountable for results. Efficient management requires knowing whom to hire and how much to pay them." Prince Adrian found himself more engaged with Princess Beatrice than he had been with Cordelia. Her intelligence was evident, and her success in managing complex enterprises suggested she possessed real leadership capabilities. Yet something in her approach troubled him, though he couldn't quite articulate what. Queen Rosalind pressed further. "But what of situations where expertise isn't immediately available, or when resources are limited? Sometimes leaders must take personal action to address urgent problems." Princess Beatrice laughed, a sound like silver bells tinkling in a gentle breeze. "Your Majesty, with sufficient wealth, any problem can be solved by hiring the right people. I've never encountered a difficulty that couldn't be resolved through proper compensation and clear contractual obligations. The key is knowing the market value of solutions." As the evening progressed, a pattern emerged in Princess Beatrice's thinking that concerned the royal parents. Every challenge she described facing had been resolved through financial means, paying experts, funding research, or simply purchasing alternative solutions. While her results were undeniably impressive, her method relied entirely on having unlimited resources and available expertise. What happens when gold runs out, or when the needed experts don't exist? King Edmund wondered aloud. "But why would such circumstances arise?" Princess Beatrice responded, genuinely puzzled. "Proper financial planning prevents resource shortages, and human ingenuity can be purchased like any other commodity. A truly successful ruler ensures these problems never occur." When Margaret arrived to escort Princess Beatrice to the Rose Chamber, the wealthy princess examined her accommodations with an appraiser's eye. She noted the quality of the furnishings, estimated the value of the artwork, and expressed satisfaction with what she calculated to be an appropriate level of luxury for someone of her station. "Quite acceptable," she declared, running her hands over the silk bed curtains. "The craftsmanship appears excellent, though I notice the gold thread in the tapestries is merely gold-plated rather than solid. Still, adequate for a guest chamber." That night, Princess Beatrice encountered the same strategically placed pebbles that had tormented Princess Cordelia. However, her response revealed a different character flaw. Rather than simply enduring the discomfort or complaining about servant incompetence, she attempted to solve the problem through her usual method, throwing money at it. She rang for service repeatedly throughout the night, demanding that staff bring additional mattresses, different pillows, and even requesting that furniture be moved to create what she called optimal sleeping conditions. When Margaret appeared, explaining that the household staff was not available until morning, Princess Beatrice offered increasingly substantial bribes for immediate assistance. "I'll pay triple wages for anyone willing to address this bed situation immediately," she declared. "Surely someone on your staff could use extra coin for relocating some mattresses." When monetary incentives failed to produce results, Princess Beatrice grew genuinely bewildered. She had never before encountered a problem that couldn't be resolved through financial leverage. The concept that she might need to investigate and address the issue personally simply didn't occur to her. Instead, she spent the night calculating increasingly generous compensation packages for hypothetical servants who might eventually solve her difficulty. The morning brought a Princess Beatrice who appeared wealthy but exhausted. Her expensive nightgown remained immaculate, and her hair was still perfectly arranged thanks to her lady-in-waiting's early morning ministrations, but her eyes bore the telltale signs of sleeplessness. "How did you sleep, dear?" Queen Rosalind asked, with the same gentle concern she had shown Princess Cordelia. "Most unsatisfactorily, I'm afraid," Princess Beatrice replied, though her tone remained businesslike rather than peevish. The bed appears to have some sort of structural deficiency. I attempted to resolve the matter through appropriate channels, offering competitive compensation for immediate service. But your staff seems remarkably resistant to financial incentives." She paused, consulting a small leather notebook she had produced from her reticule. "I've calculated what I believe would be fair market value for emergency household services, and I'm prepared to provide payment now if someone could address the bed situation before tonight. I've also drafted a proposal for upgrading your guest accommodations that I think you'll find quite generous." Princess Beatrice continued for several more minutes, outlining detailed plans for purchasing better furniture, hiring expert consultants to evaluate sleeping conditions, and establishing service protocols that would prevent future guests from experiencing similar difficulties. Her proposals were thorough and well-reasoned, demonstrating genuine problem-solving abilities within her preferred framework. Yet, King Edmund and Queen Rosalind recognized the fundamental limitation in her approach. Princess Beatrice was indeed capable of addressing problems, but only when she could delegate responsibility to others and fund solutions through her family's considerable wealth. The idea of personal, hands-on investigation and action remained foreign to her experience. As Princess Beatrice departed 3 days later, her carriages laden with gifts she had insisted on leaving behind, Prince Adrian felt a mixture of relief and growing concern. 2 impressive candidates had failed their test, each revealing character flaws that would prove catastrophic during a real crisis when money, servants, and expertise might not be available. "Perhaps we're being too demanding," he suggested to his parents as they watched Princess Beatrice's elaborate entourage disappear down the winding road. "No, my son," Queen Rosalind replied firmly. "We're being appropriately careful. The right princess will understand instinctively what these two could not, that true leadership sometimes requires rolling up one's sleeves and solving problems personally, regardless of one's station or resources." Chapter 5. A storm approaches. In the weeks that followed Princess Beatrice's departure, Castle Valdoria received a steady stream of noble visitors, each bringing their own interpretation of royal worthiness. Princess Evangeline of Rosewood arrived with a reputation for kindness and charitable works. Yet, when faced with the pebbled bed, she spent the entire night in prayer, asking divine providence to grant her strength to endure her suffering rather than seeking earthly solutions to her discomfort. Princess Magdalena of Ironhold, known for her scholarly pursuits, analyzed her sleepless night as a fascinating study in the philosophy of adversity, composing mental essays about the nature of comfort, while never once examining the bed itself. Each failure deepened Prince Adrian's melancholy. He had begun spending his evenings in the castle's ancient library, a vast chamber lined with leather-bound volumes that chronicled centuries of royal history. Surrounded by the wisdom of ages, he searched for guidance from past rulers who had faced similar challenges in choosing their life partners. "Listen to this, father," he said one evening as King Edmund joined him among the dusty tomes. King Aldrich the Wise wrote, "A crown shared with the wrong person becomes a burden that crushes 2 souls instead of 1. Better to rule alone with wisdom than together with foolishness." Adrian closed the heavy volume with a sigh. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I'm destined to rule without a true partner. King Edmund settled into the chair beside his son, noting the weight that seemed to have settled on the young man's shoulders. Aldrich wrote those words after his first wife proved more interested in court festivities than governance. But you'll notice he married again 3 years later to a merchant's daughter, who became one of our kingdom's most beloved queens. "Yes, but she was exceptional," Adrian replied, gesturing toward another chronicle. "Queen Helena literally saved the kingdom from famine by reorganizing the grain distribution system. How many such women exist in our time?" Outside the library's tall windows, storm clouds had been gathering throughout the afternoon. What had begun as a gentle, overcast sky had transformed into something far more ominous. Dark thunderheads rolled across the horizon like great ships sailing through an ocean of gray, their edges tinged with the peculiar green light that preceded the most violent weather. Thunder rumbled in the distance, still far enough away to be merely atmospheric rather than threatening, but close enough to make the castle's inhabitants take notice. Servants began securing loose items in the courtyards, while the stable masters moved the horses to the interior stalls that offered better protection from high winds. "Perhaps the storm is fitting," Prince Adrian mused, watching lightning flicker within the approaching clouds. "I feel as though my entire future hangs in the balance, uncertain and tempestuous." Queen Rosalind appeared in the library doorway, having sought out her husband and son when she noticed the approaching weather. "The storm looks to be quite severe," she observed, joining them near the windows. "I've instructed Margaret to prepare additional guest chambers in case any travelers seek shelter tonight." "More princesses?" Adrian asked with barely concealed resignation. "Not necessarily," his mother replied gently. "Sometimes the most unexpected visitors bring the greatest gifts. Your father and I met during just such a storm, when I sought shelter at his father's castle while traveling to what I thought would be my arranged marriage to another prince entirely." King Edmund smiled at the memory. "The worst thunderstorm in 50 years, according to the castle records. Yet it proved to be the most fortunate night of my life." The wind began to howl around the castle's ancient stones, causing the library's heavy curtains to billow despite the closed windows. Rain started as a gentle pattering against the glass, but within minutes had intensified to a steady drumming that spoke of the deluge to come. "I've been thinking about our test," Prince Adrian admitted, turning away from the increasingly violent weather. "Perhaps we've been too rigid in our expectations. Princess Evangeline showed genuine compassion, even if she didn't solve the bed problem. Princess Magdalena possessed remarkable intelligence. Surely some of their qualities could compensate for their practical limitations." His parents exchanged a meaningful glance. They had anticipated this moment, when their son's loneliness might tempt him to compromise on the very qualities that would make his future reign successful. "My dear son," Queen Rosalind said softly, "kindness without action becomes mere sentiment. Intelligence without application remains academic exercise. The challenges you'll face as king won't pause to accommodate good intentions or theoretical knowledge. They'll require someone who can think quickly and act decisively, even when the situation is uncomfortable or unfamiliar." Lightning illuminated the library in stark white relief, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that shook the castle's foundations. The storm had arrived with surprising speed and unexpected violence. "Consider this weather," King Edmund said, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the howling wind. "A truly terrible storm can't be managed through prayer alone, no matter how sincere. It can't be resolved by paying someone else to make it go away. It requires practical action, securing loose objects, protecting vulnerable people, ensuring adequate supplies. The princess who will stand beside you must be someone who instinctively takes such action." As if summoned by their conversation, Margaret appeared in the library doorway, slightly out of breath from hurrying through the castle corridors. "Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but the storm has intensified beyond anything we anticipated. The wind has already damaged several outbuildings, and the rain is coming down in torrents. I've never seen weather quite like this." Prince Adrian moved to the window, peering through the rain-lashed glass at what had become a scene of chaos. Trees bent nearly horizontal under the force of the wind, and debris flew through the air like projectiles. The usually pristine castle grounds had transformed into a landscape of scattered leaves, broken branches, and rapidly forming puddles that threatened to become ponds. "Any travelers caught in this weather would be in genuine danger," he observed with concern. "We should send out search parties once the worst passes." "Already arranged, Your Highness. Margaret replied, "though I fear anyone still on the roads tonight will have little choice but to find whatever shelter they can until morning." The storm raged on as the royal family remained in the library, alternately reading and watching nature's display of raw power through the windows. None of them could have imagined that somewhere in the tempest, fighting through wind and rain with determination that would have impressed even their rigorous standards, a figure was making her way toward their castle, a young woman whose approach would change everything they thought they knew about love, leadership, and the true meaning of nobility. As midnight approached, and the storm showed no signs of abating, Prince Adrian finally retired to his chambers, unaware that fate was about to arrive at his doorstep in the most unexpected form imaginable. The greatest test of his parents' wisdom was approaching through the darkness, carried on winds that seemed to shake the very foundations of their carefully ordered world. Chapter 6. The heroine's dramatic entrance. The great oak doors of Castle Valdoria shuddered under the force of desperate knocking at midnight. The sound echoed through the stone corridors like thunder, cutting through the howling wind and driving rain that had transformed the night into a maelstrom of elemental fury. Thomas, the night watchman, hurried through the torch-lit hallways, his footsteps echoing against ancient stones as he wondered what soul could possibly be abroad in such weather. When he drew back the heavy iron bolts and opened the massive doors, Thomas found himself staring at a figure that seemed conjured from the storm itself. A young woman stood swaying on the threshold, soaked to the skin and shivering violently, her dark hair plastered against her head by the relentless rain. Her traveling dress, once fine blue silk, had been transformed into a bedraggled ruin that clung to her slight frame. Mud splattered her from head to toe, and her delicate slippers had been reduced to soggy remnants that squelched with every movement. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible above the storm's fury. "I seek shelter from this tempest. My carriage, it broke down miles from here. I've been walking through this storm for hours." Thomas immediately stepped aside, his years of service telling him that no one should be left to face such weather, regardless of their station or circumstances. "Of course, miss. Come in. Come in at once. You must be frozen through." The young woman stumbled across the threshold, water streaming from her ruined clothing to pool on the polished marble floor. In the flickering candlelight of the great hall, Thomas could see that despite her bedraggled appearance, she possessed an innate grace that suggested noble birth. Her posture remained erect despite her exhaustion, and her voice, though weakened by cold and fatigue, carried the refined accents of educated speech. "I am Princess Isabella of Meridian," she said, attempting a curtsy that nearly sent her tumbling. "I was traveling to the court of Duke Aldwin for diplomatic negotiations when the storm struck. My carriage wheel shattered on the terrible roads, and my escort deemed it safer to remain with the vehicle. I chose to seek help rather than wait." Thomas bowed respectfully, though his mind raced with the implications of her words. A princess had chosen to walk alone through a dangerous storm rather than wait helplessly for rescue. Such behavior was almost unheard of among the nobility, who typically viewed personal safety as someone else's responsibility. "Your Highness, I must summon their majesties immediately," Thomas began, but Isabella raised a trembling hand to stop him. "Please, don't disturb the royal family at this hour. I ask only for shelter until the storm passes. A servant's quarters would be perfectly adequate. I'm hardly in a position to require royal treatment in my current state." Before Thomas could respond, footsteps echoed from the main staircase. Prince Adrian appeared, having been unable to sleep through the storm's violence. He had thrown a heavy robe over his night clothes and carried a candle to light his way, intending to check on the castle security during the tempest. The moment his eyes fell upon the mysterious figure in the great hall, Adrian felt something shift within his chest. A recognition that transcended logic or explanation. Despite her disheveled appearance, or perhaps because of it, Princess Isabella possessed a quality that none of his previous suitors had demonstrated: authenticity. Here stood a woman who had faced genuine adversity and chosen action over passive acceptance. "Good heavens," Adrian breathed, immediately moving toward her. "You must be chilled to the bone. Thomas, please wake Margaret and ask her to prepare hot tea and dry clothing immediately." Isabella looked up at the prince, and in that moment, both young people experienced something that all the arranged meetings and formal courtships had failed to produce. Their eyes met across the candlelit hall, and despite the storm raging outside, despite her bedraggled condition, despite the lateness of the hour, an understanding passed between them that needed no words. "Your Highness," Isabella said softly, managing a more successful curtsy despite her weakened state, "I apologize for this intrusion. I had no choice but to seek shelter from the storm." "No apology is necessary," Adrian replied, his voice gentler than what he directed toward any of the previous princesses. "Your courage in traveling through such weather speaks well of your character. Many would have simply waited for rescue." Margaret appeared with remarkable speed, having been awakened by Thomas. The experienced housekeeper took in the situation at a glance and immediately assumed command of the practical arrangements. "Come, Your Highness," she said to Isabella with motherly authority. "We must get you warm and dry before you catch your death. I'll have hot soup and tea ready within the quarter hour." As Margaret led Isabella toward the guest quarters, the princess paused to address Prince Adrian once more. "Thank you for your kindness, Your Highness. I hope to repay your hospitality by sharing what news I carry from the eastern provinces. There have been developments that might interest your court." Even in her exhausted state, Isabella was thinking of how she might contribute rather than simply receive aid. This detail was not lost on Prince Adrian, who found himself more intrigued by this muddy, bedraggled princess than he had been by all the polished beauties who had preceded her. "I would be honored to hear your news," he replied, "but first you must rest and recover from your ordeal. We can speak properly in the morning." As Margaret guided Isabella up the stairs toward what would prove to be the most fateful night's sleep in the castle's history, Prince Adrian remained in the great hall, staring after them with wonder. King Edmund and Queen Rosalind, awakened by the commotion, appeared at the top of the main staircase. "Who was that remarkable young woman?" Queen Rosalind inquired, having caught enough of the conversation to understand the situation. "Princess Isabella of Meridian," Adrian replied, his voice filled with something his parents had never heard when he spoke of other potential brides: genuine admiration mixed with hope. "Mother, father, I think she might be different from the others." King Edmund and Queen Rosalind exchanged meaningful glances. They had noted the same qualities in their brief glimpse of the mysterious princess, the combination of noble bearing and practical determination that they had been seeking. But they also knew that their test awaited her, and that morning would reveal whether their first impressions proved accurate. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the castle walls, but within the ancient halls, something had changed. For the first time in months, Prince Adrian fell asleep with hope in his heart, while in the Rose Chamber, Princess Isabella was about to face the trial that would determine not only her worthiness as a bride, but the future happiness of an entire kingdom. Chapter 7. The Test Begins. Margaret guided Princess Isabella through the torch-lit corridors of Castle Valdoria, past tapestries that seemed to dance in the flickering light, and portraits of long-dead kings whose painted eyes appeared to follow their passage. Despite her exhaustion, Isabella took note of her surroundings with the keen observation of someone accustomed to diplomatic travel and the necessity of understanding new environments quickly. "You have a beautiful castle," Isabella said, pausing to admire a particularly intricate tapestry depicting a harvest festival. "The craftsmanship is exceptional. Is that the work of local artisans?" Margaret smiled, pleased by the princess's genuine interest. Most royal guests barely acknowledged the castle's treasures, viewing them as mere backdrops to their own importance. Indeed it is, Your Highness. Queen Rosalind has always believed in supporting local craftspeople. She says a kingdom's true wealth lies in the skills of its people. How wise, Isabella replied, and Margaret could hear the sincerity in her voice. In Meridian, we've found that investing in our artisans creates prosperity that benefits everyone, not just the nobility. They arrived at the Rose Chamber, where Margaret had already directed servants to light a fire in the ornate marble fireplace and lay out fresh towels beside a basin of warm water. The room glowed with welcoming warmth, a stark contrast to the storm's fury that continued to rage beyond the windows. "I've taken the liberty of preparing a warm bath," Margaret said, indicating a copper tub that had been filled with steaming water. "There are clean garments in the wardrobe. I believe they should fit adequately. Ring if you need anything at all during the night." Isabella's eyes filled with gratitude that seemed to go far beyond mere politeness. "You're incredibly kind, Margaret. Thank you for taking such care of a stranger who arrived unannounced in the middle of the night." The housekeeper curtsied, but her expression remained warm. "It's no trouble at all, Your Highness. Anyone brave enough to walk through such a storm to reach safety deserves every comfort we can provide." After Margaret departed, Isabella began the process of transforming herself from a bedraggled storm victim into something resembling a proper princess. The warm bath was a blessing beyond words, washing away not only the mud and rain, but also the bone-deep chill that had settled into her very soul during her long walk through the tempest. As she soaked in the copper tub, Isabella reflected on the evening's events. Her diplomatic mission to Duke Aldwin's court had been proceeding normally until the storm struck with unprecedented violence. When the carriage wheel had shattered on a road turned treacherous by rain and debris, her escorts had immediately begun making camp, preparing to wait out the weather in whatever shelter they could construct. But Isabella had studied the maps carefully during their journey, and she knew they were only a few miles from Castle Valdoria. While her guards built their makeshift shelter, she had made a decision that her tutors would have deemed both improper and dangerous. She would walk to the castle and seek proper assistance. Her escorts had protested vehemently, but Isabella's mind was made up. Waiting passively while a solution lay within reach went against every principle she had learned about effective leadership. The walk had been harrowing. Rain had lashed her face with stinging intensity. Wind had threatened to knock her from the muddy path, and several times she had lost her way entirely in the darkness. But she had pressed on, guided by the occasional flash of lightning that revealed the castle's towers in the distance. Now, warm and clean in the luxurious guest chamber, Isabella felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. Tomorrow, she would arrange for proper assistance to reach her stranded party, and hopefully continue her journey to Duke Aldwin's court. But tonight, she was simply grateful to be safe and dry. The Rose Chamber was, indeed, magnificent, more luxurious than many royal suites she had occupied during her travels. The four-poster bed dominated the space, its carved posts depicting intertwined roses and vines that seemed to bloom even in the candlelight. Silk curtains in deep crimson hung from the canopy, and the mattress appeared thick and inviting beneath covers of the finest linen. Isabella approached the bed with the weary gratitude of someone who had spent hours fighting through wind and rain. She had changed into a nightgown Margaret had provided soft cotton that felt like heaven against her storm-battered skin. The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere of warmth and safety that made the tempest outside seem like a distant memory. She pulled back the elegant covers and settled onto the mattress with a sigh of relief, expecting to fall asleep immediately, despite the storm's continued roaring beyond the windows. Instead, within moments of lying down, Isabella became aware of an unmistakable discomfort. Something was wrong with the bed. Not obviously wrong, but subtly yet persistently uncomfortable. At first, she tried shifting positions, thinking perhaps she was simply overtired and restless from her ordeal. But no matter how she arranged herself, the sensation persisted, an odd, lumpy feeling that made restful sleep impossible. The discomfort wasn't painful exactly, but it was definitely present, like lying on a collection of small, hard objects that created pressure points against her back and hips. Many of the previous princesses would have spent the night tossing and turning, composing complaints for the morning. Some might have tried to ignore the problem through sheer determination, viewing investigation as beneath their dignity. Others might have summoned servants, demanding immediate solutions. But Isabella's response revealed the character that had driven her to walk through a dangerous storm, rather than wait helplessly for rescue. Her first thought was not, "How dare they give me an uncomfortable bed?" or "I must endure this with grace," but rather, "What's causing this problem, and how can I fix it?" Rising from the bed, Isabella lit additional candles from the fireplace, illuminating the chamber more thoroughly. She began a systematic investigation, running her hands over the mattress surface, pressing gently to identify the source of the discomfort. Her approach was methodical and intelligent, the response of someone accustomed to solving problems rather than simply complaining about them. "There's definitely something here," she murmured to herself, continuing her careful examination. "Something small and hard. But what could it be?" The investigation that followed would determine not only her comfort for the remainder of the night, but the entire course of her future, and that of the kingdom whose prince had already begun to fall in love with a muddy, determined princess, who faced storms with courage and problems with intelligence. Chapter 8. The Morning Revelation. Isabella's investigation had continued well into the night, driven by the same determination that had carried her through the storm. Working by candlelight, she had systematically examined every inch of the magnificent bed, feeling along the mattress edges and testing different areas for the source of her discomfort. Her methodical approach finally led her to lift the heavy mattresses themselves, and there, carefully arranged on the bed frame beneath, she discovered 7 smooth river pebbles. "Well, hello there," she had whispered to herself, holding one of the stones up to the candlelight with curiosity rather than irritation. What an odd place for pebbles to find themselves. Rather than viewing this as some sort of trick or insult, Isabella's diplomatic training led her to consider various explanations. Perhaps the stones had been used as makeshift bed warmers and forgotten by a careless servant. Maybe they served some structural purpose she didn't understand. Or possibly they had simply fallen from someone's pocket during bed-making. Whatever the reason, the solution was obvious. Remove the pebbles, and the bed would become comfortable. She had collected all 7 stones, examining each one with the interest of someone who appreciated problem-solving in all its forms. They were beautiful in their own way, smooth and perfectly rounded by years of river current, each one a testament to nature's patient artistry. Rather than discarding them, she had arranged them carefully on the nightstand, where they caught the firelight like small polished gems. With the pebbles removed, the bed had indeed become supremely comfortable, and Isabella had finally enjoyed several hours of peaceful sleep before dawn broke over the castle walls. The storm had exhausted itself during the night, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling with morning dew. Now, as golden sunlight streamed through the rose chamber's tall windows, Isabella stood before the mirror, adjusting the borrowed dress Margaret had provided. The garment fit remarkably well, an elegant gown of deep green wool that complemented her dark hair and brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Though she looked every inch a proper princess, her demeanor carried none of the affected superiority that had characterized her predecessors. A soft knock at the door announced Margaret's arrival with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Your Highness. I do hope the storm didn't disturb your rest too greatly." "Actually, I slept wonderfully once I sorted out a small issue," Isabella replied with a genuine smile. "The chamber is absolutely beautiful, Margaret." Thank you again for such gracious hospitality." Margaret's eyes flickered to the nightstand, where the 7 pebbles sat arranged in a neat row, glinting in the morning sunlight. For a moment, the experienced housekeeper's composure wavered. In all the previous tests, no princess had ever discovered and displayed the stones so matter-of-factly. "I see you found some interesting decorations," Margaret said carefully, her voice betraying just a hint of excitement that she struggled to suppress. "Oh yes, the little pebbles," Isabella said, glancing at them fondly. "They were tucked under the mattresses, rather uncomfortable for sleeping, but quite lovely to look at. I hope I didn't overstep by moving them. They seemed out of place beneath the bed." Margaret could barely contain her amazement, but years of royal service had trained her well in maintaining proper decorum. "Not at all, Your Highness. I'm sure their majesties will be very interested to hear about your night." An hour later, the royal family assembled in the morning room for breakfast. The same sun-drenched chamber where so many previous princesses had revealed their fundamental unsuitability for true leadership. King Edmund and Queen Rosalind sat with barely contained anticipation, while Prince Adrian appeared more nervous than he had before any previous test results. When Princess Isabella entered the morning room, the transformation from the bedraggled storm victim of the previous night was remarkable. She moved with natural grace, but without the studied artificiality that had marked other candidates. Her beauty was evident, but it was the kind that came from within, intelligence, warmth, and genuine character shining through her features. "Good morning, Your Majesties, Your Highness," Isabella said, offering curtsies that were perfectly respectful without being obsequious. "I cannot express how grateful I am for your kindness in sheltering me from that terrible storm." Prince Adrian rose to help her to her seat, their hands touching briefly as he guided her chair. The connection they had felt the previous night remained strong in the light of day, but now it was accompanied by something deeper, a recognition that went beyond mere physical attraction to something approaching true understanding. "I trust the storm didn't prevent you from resting, Princess Isabella?" King Edmund inquired, though his tone suggested the question was far more significant than mere polite inquiry. "Actually, Your Majesty, I slept quite well," Isabella replied, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had successfully solved a puzzle. "Though I must confess, when I first retired, I encountered a small problem that required some investigation." Queen Rosalind leaned forward slightly, her heart beginning to race with anticipation. "Oh, what sort of problem, dear?" Isabella's response would echo through the castle's history, marking the moment when months of careful testing finally yielded the result the royal family had been desperately seeking. "The bed was quite uncomfortable at first," Isabella explained, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing a minor logistical challenge. "Something was definitely wrong. I could feel hard objects beneath the mattresses that made it impossible to sleep. So I got up and investigated the source of the problem." She paused to sip her tea, completely unaware of the profound impact her words were having on her audience. Prince Adrian's eyes had begun to shine with hope, while his parents exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing excitement. "I discovered 7 beautiful pebbles that had somehow found their way under the mattresses," Isabella continued. "Once I removed them and set them aside, the bed became perfectly comfortable. I hope that was acceptable. I didn't want to leave them where they might continue causing problems for future guests." The silence that followed her explanation stretched for several heartbeats, broken only by the gentle ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. Then King Edmund began to smile. Not the polite, diplomatic smile he had worn for so many previous candidates, but a genuine expression of joy and relief. "Princess Isabella," he said, his voice filled with warmth that surprised even him, "would you mind terribly if I asked you to show us these pebbles you discovered?" "Of course, Your Majesty," Isabella replied, rising from her chair with natural grace. "I left them on the nightstand in the rose chamber. They're really quite beautiful, perfectly smooth river stones. I couldn't bring myself to simply discard them." As she left the morning room to retrieve the pebbles, Queen Rosalind reached across the table to grasp her husband's hand, while Prince Adrian sat in stunned silence, hardly daring to believe that their long search might finally be over. "She solved it," Queen Rosalind whispered. "She actually solved it." "More than that," King Edmund replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She solved it and showed absolutely no resentment or complaint. She approached the problem as something to be addressed, not endured." Prince Adrian could only nod, overwhelmed by the realization that the woman he was already falling in love with might also be exactly the partner his kingdom needed. Chapter 9. Love and Understanding. When Princess Isabella returned to the morning room carrying the 7 smooth pebbles cupped in her palms like precious jewels, the atmosphere in the chamber had transformed completely. Gone was the polite tension that had characterized so many previous breakfasts with potential brides. Instead, King Edmund and Queen Rosalind sat with barely contained joy, while Prince Adrian watched Isabella's every movement with wonder and growing certainty. "Here they are," Isabella said, gently placing the stones on the polished breakfast table where morning sunlight made them gleam like small treasures. "I must say, they're remarkably well-shaped. Someone clearly took great care in selecting them." The simple statement revealed yet another aspect of Isabella's character that set her apart from every previous candidate. Rather than demanding explanations or expressing indignation at what others might have viewed as a test or trick, she had approached the entire situation with curiosity and grace. King Edmund picked up one of the pebbles, turning it over in his hands as he had done countless times during their planning. "Princess Isabella, before we continue, I believe we owe you an explanation. These stones were not placed in your bed by accident." Isabella's eyebrows rose with interest rather than anger. "Oh, then there was a purpose to their placement?" "Indeed there was," Queen Rosalind said, her voice warm with admiration for this remarkable young woman. "We have been, shall we say, evaluating the character of Prince Adrian's potential brides through a most unusual method." As the royal parents explained their elaborate test, describing the parade of failed candidates and their underlying philosophy about leadership requiring action rather than passive endurance, Isabella listened with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in understanding their reasoning. "How brilliant," she said when they had finished their explanation, her response surprising even the royal family. "You created a test that reveals character in crisis rather than simply observing polite behavior in comfortable circumstances. I imagine most candidates either complained about the discomfort or simply endured it without taking action." "Precisely," King Edmund confirmed. "Some demanded that servants be punished for the oversight. Others offered payment to have the problem fixed. And still others viewed suffering through the night as a demonstration of noble stoicism. But none of them simply investigated and solved the problem themselves," Isabella observed thoughtfully. "How fascinating! In diplomatic negotiations, I've learned that the most revealing moments come not during formal presentations, but when unexpected difficulties arise and people must respond instinctively." Prince Adrian had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. Not only had Isabella passed their test, but she understood and appreciated the wisdom behind it. Here was a woman who thought like a true leader, someone who could be a genuine partner in the complex work of ruling a kingdom. "Princess Isabella," he said, rising from his chair and moving to stand beside her, "I must confess that our test was not the only evaluation taking place yesterday evening." She looked up at him with curious eyes, and once again that indefinable connection sparked between them, stronger now, supported by admiration and understanding rather than mere physical attraction. "When I saw you standing in our great hall last night," Adrian continued, his voice growing softer, "bedraggled from the storm but determined and gracious despite your ordeal, I felt something I had never experienced with any other person. And now, learning that you possess not only the courage to walk through a dangerous storm to seek help, but also the practical wisdom to solve problems rather than simply complaining about them. He paused, taking her hands in his, the 7 pebbles glinting between them on the table like witnesses to this moment of truth. Isabella, I believe I fell in love with you the moment you arrived seeking shelter. But this morning, I realize I have fallen in love with exactly the kind of woman our kingdom needs as its queen. Isabella's eyes shone with tears of joy, but her response revealed once more the thoughtful character that had brought her to this moment. Adrian, I felt that same connection last night, despite the circumstances, but I must tell you honestly, I would want to be your partner in every sense of the word. Not a decorative queen who attends ceremonies and leaves the real work to others, but someone who shares both the privileges and the responsibilities of leadership. That is precisely what we have been hoping to hear, Queen Rosalind said, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. We have watched too many kingdoms suffer under rulers who viewed their positions as entitlements rather than obligations to serve others. King Edmund nodded gravely. Isabella, your response to our test tells us that you understand something many people never learn. That true nobility lies not in accepting problems with grace, but in having the wisdom and courage to make things better when it lies within your power to do so. I learned that lesson from my parents, Isabella replied, glancing toward the window where the morning sun illuminated the kingdom spread below them. They taught me that leadership is not about commanding others to serve you, but about serving others through your ability to command solutions to their problems. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, as the royal family and Isabella discovered the remarkable alignment of their values and vision. They discussed governance philosophy, the balance between diplomacy and decisive action, and the challenges facing kingdoms in their changing world. With every exchange, it became clearer that Isabella was not simply a suitable candidate for queen, she was the perfect partner for both Prince Adrian personally and the kingdom's future prosperity. Finally, as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Prince Adrian took Isabella's hands once more and spoke the words that would change both their lives forever. Princess Isabella of Meridian, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you stand beside me as we work together to serve our people and face whatever challenges the future may bring? Isabella's answer came without hesitation, her voice clear and certain. Yes, Adrian, I can think of no greater privilege than sharing both your love and your commitment to making our kingdom stronger and more prosperous. As they embraced in the sunlit morning room, King Edmund carefully gathered the 7 pebbles from the breakfast table. These small stones had served their purpose magnificently, revealing the character they had so desperately hoped to find. But their story was far from over. Soon, they would find a place of honor in the castle, serving as a permanent reminder of the day when wisdom, determination, and love had combined to secure the kingdom's future. The long search was over. The test had been passed, and a new chapter in the history of Valdoria was about to begin, written by 2 people who understood that the greatest problems could be solved by those brave enough to investigate their causes and dedicated enough to take action. Chapter 10. The Happily Ever After. 3 months later, on a glorious spring morning when the castle gardens bloomed with roses that seemed to celebrate the occasion, Princess Isabella of Meridian became Queen Isabella of Valdoria, in a wedding that would be remembered for generations. The ceremony took place in the castle's great courtyard, where hundreds of subjects gathered to witness the marriage of their beloved prince to the remarkable woman who had won not only his heart, but the profound respect of everyone who had come to know her. The wedding itself reflected the values that had brought Isabella and Adrian together. Rather than an ostentatious display designed to impress foreign dignitaries, the celebration honored the kingdom's own artisans and traditions. Local musicians provided entertainment. Castle cooks prepared feast dishes using ingredients from Valdoria's own farms, and the decorations showcased the work of the kingdom's craftspeople. Isabella had insisted on these arrangements, understanding that a royal wedding should celebrate the realm's strengths rather than foreign luxuries. During the ceremony, 7 smooth river pebbles sat in a place of honor on the altar, polished to gleaming perfection and displayed in a crystal case that caught the morning sunlight. Many guests wondered about the significance of these simple stones, but those who understood their meaning smiled knowingly at the perfect symbolism. "These pebbles," King Edmund announced during his wedding address, "represent the moment we discovered that true nobility lies not in enduring problems with patience, but in having the wisdom to recognize when solutions lie within our grasp and the courage to pursue them." The crowd murmured with appreciation, understanding that their new queen embodied exactly these qualities. Archbishop Benedict, who had officiated at royal weddings for 3 decades, later declared that he had never witnessed a couple whose compatibility seemed so perfectly suited for both personal happiness and effective leadership. During their vows, Isabella and Adrian promised not only to love and cherish each other, but to serve their people with wisdom, courage, and the determination to make things better whenever possible. The celebration continued for 3 days, but even during the festivities, the new royal couple demonstrated the practical leadership that would characterize their entire reign. When unexpected rain threatened the outdoor ceremonies on the 2nd day, Isabella personally helped organize the relocation of events to covered areas, working alongside servants to move decorations and ensure guests remained comfortable. When a shortage of seating arose due to more attendees than anticipated, Adrian and Isabella together designed a solution that created additional space while actually improving the viewing arrangements for everyone. Their honeymoon period was brief by royal standards, but perfectly suited to their characters. Rather than retreating to distant luxury accommodations, they spent 2 weeks traveling through different regions of Valdoria, meeting with local leaders, farmers, merchants, and artisans. Isabella insisted on understanding every aspect of her new kingdom, from crop rotation schedules to trade route logistics, approaching her role as queen with the same methodical intelligence she had applied to solving the mystery of the uncomfortable bed. During their travels, they encountered their first real test as a ruling partnership. A bridge collapse in the eastern provinces had cut off trade routes and isolated several farming communities just as harvest season approached. Previous royal responses to such crises had typically involved sending messages of sympathy and dispatching bureaucrats to assess the situation. Isabella and Adrian rode directly to the affected area, rolled up their sleeves, and worked with local engineers and laborers to design and implement a temporary solution that restored commerce within days rather than months. "This is exactly what we hoped to see," Queen Rosalind confided to her husband as they received reports of their son and daughter-in-law's hands-on crisis management. "They're not just ruling, they're leading." The pebbles, meanwhile, had found their permanent home in the castle's main hall, displayed in an elegant crystal case with a brass plaque that told their story. The inscription read, "These stones remind us that the greatest problems yield to those who have the wisdom to investigate their causes and the determination to take action." Presented by King Edmund and Queen Rosalind to commemorate the marriage of Prince Adrian and Princess Isabella, who proved that true nobility lies in making things better rather than simply enduring them with grace. Visitors to the castle often paused before the display, and the story of the pebbles became legendary throughout the kingdom. Parents told their children about the princess who solved problems instead of complaining about them. Teachers used the tale to inspire students to approach difficulties with curiosity rather than despair. The 7 stones had become symbols of the practical wisdom and active courage that Valdoria's citizens increasingly expected from all their leaders. As the months passed into years, Isabella and Adrian's reign fulfilled every hope their test had been designed to identify. When drought threatened the northern provinces, they didn't simply pray for rain. They organized water conservation programs and invested in irrigation systems. When neighboring kingdoms experienced political upheavals that could have disrupted trade, they didn't wait for the situation to resolve itself. They proactively negotiated new agreements that actually expanded Valdoria's prosperity. Their approach to governance became a model studied by other kingdoms. Rather than ruling from a distance, Isabella and Adrian maintained the habits that had brought them together. They investigated problems personally, developed practical solutions, and took direct action when circumstances required it. Their subjects prospered under leaders who viewed every challenge as an opportunity to demonstrate that good governance meant making things better, not just managing them competently. 5 years after their wedding, as Isabella held their first child, a daughter who would grow up seeing the pebbles every day and learning their meaning, she and Adrian often reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. The terrible storm that had seemed like such a disaster had actually been the vehicle of their destiny. The uncomfortable bed that might have frustrated or angered a different person had revealed the character traits that made their partnership so successful. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had simply endured that uncomfortable bed without investigating? Isabella asked one evening as they walked through their gardens, their infant daughter sleeping peacefully in Isabella's arms. I prefer not to contemplate such disasters, Adrian replied with a smile, wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders. Though I suspect my parents would have continued testing candidates until they found someone willing to solve problems rather than complain about them. The pebbles chose well then, Isabella said, looking up at the castle where the crystal display case caught the last rays of sunset. 7 little stones that changed the course of a kingdom. And indeed they had. Under the leadership of King Adrian and Queen Isabella, Valdoria became renowned throughout the region as a kingdom where problems were solved rather than endured, where leaders took personal responsibility for making things better, and where the wisdom to investigate combined with the courage to act had created prosperity and happiness that extended far beyond the castle walls. The 7 pebbles continued to gleam in their crystal case, silent witnesses to the truth that the greatest obstacles often conceal the greatest opportunities, but only for those brave enough to lift the covers and discover what lies beneath, and wise enough to take action when they find solutions within their reach. In the fairy tales of old, princesses proved their worth through passive endurance of suffering. But in the kingdom of Valdoria, a new kind of story had been written. One where true nobility was measured not by the grace with which one accepted problems, but by the wisdom and determination with which one solved them. And they all lived happily, prosperously, and actively ever after.